Ah, you came in early.
Hello there.
You there?
I'm here.
You came in rather early, which is a good thing.
I know. For some reason in my head I had it 7:30 and then it was really 7:45. So that's
How long have
excited
you
I am.
been on?
Just a couple minutes.
Ah, okay. Perfect timing then. All right. So before we get started, just an FYI, I read about 5 or 6 pages in to your story. So I'm probably gonna start out with a little introduction from your story, and we'll go from there. And then you have let me just grab the question. Let me just grab my phone, which has the questionnaire. All right.
Okay.
What time is it down there? And are you on the East Coast? Oh yeah, Delaware, right?
Yeah. It's 7:42.
Okay. Let me see. Let's go to Gmail.
Pleasure meeting you.
You too. I was just. We're gonna get into a little bit of. I did another recording last night with a very close friend of mine. So yeah, we'll also get to that. Yeah, I think I sent you this on the 4th. Okay, perfect. All right, everyone. Here we go. Okay, welcome back to Pick Your Brains podcast tonight. Last night's episode, I interviewed a very old friend of mine who we knew each other going all the way back to elementary school. So for tonight, back to my social worker theme. Tonight I have another social worker who can now call himself a co-author, and it's from Latinex in Social Work Volume 2. Tonight we have Moreno, who's going to actually be talking to us about little about his career story, why he became a social worker, and why he got into mental health. So I think I'm going to start out with just, like the first sort of paragraph from Embrace Your Reset. So the first paragraph from this in the introduction is pills, alcohol after childbirth. Being a single dad of 2 children probably had been the toughest thing I've ever done. Though my divorce wasn't finalized until 2015, just a year prior, my marriage was over. It had been falling apart with me losing myself as a person and having low self-esteem. So right there, I want to point something out to you, since you are in the social work field. You're familiar with the DSM chart, correct?
Yes.
I was diagnosed at 4 years old, again at 27, and then throughout high school as what we knew back in the 1990s as Asperger's syndrome, mild Asperger's syndrome, and severe ADHD. Today, we now call that autism spectrum disorder, or they've renamed it so many times.
Yes, exactly.
Like now they have high function and low function, which is
Yes.
ridiculous to me because all I am is developmentally learning disabled. I have a friend who's a career coach who works on Amazon, who works for Amazon. Her husband had a brain tumor, right? And he's from France. So I believe he's probably around your age. You're Gen X, correct?
Yeah, I'm like the last couple years of Gen X.
With 75 to 80?
Yeah, I was born in 79, so I'm 44.
Okay, yeah. So we're not sort of too far off because I'm considered elder millennial right here, 1985.
Gotcha.
So anyway, one thing that most people have a hard time understanding or processing that I know you'll understand, and even my friend who was on last night, who's a certified state teacher, understands, a lot of people with autism actually don't have the best self-esteem. A lot of that starts with sometimes in the 90s, for example. I don't know what went on, not necessarily your marriage, but maybe this went back to childhood. Do you want to walk us through a little bit of not the divorce, but why you had the low self-esteem?
Honestly, I'm still trying to process that. I recently started going to therapy, so my therapist this week, she's like, "You're gonna be here for a while." So I have a lot to unpack and kind of I go in different directions and in my sessions so far, and I've been conscious of that. So
So
I,
I'm very curious. So therapists have their own therapist?
yeah.
I'm not laughing about it in a surprise ha ha way. I would imagine with some of the stuff you go through, not just within the industry but in your personal life, you guys need someone to talk to too, since you're always providing the guidance for us.
Yeah, I mean, I made the decision late last year during the holidays. I'm like, all right, 2024 is the year I go to therapy. So
I
yeah,
don't blame you. And it's interesting because your lead author was actually interviewed for the 914 podcast back in December, Erica, and she was actually talking about holiday stress, which, depending on where you are in your life, it can be tough for a lot of people. It's not that it might look like as a single person that I have it easier, but I'll tell you this, I don't.
I believe it.
We make less money than our married counterpart friends. It might look like, we have things easier, but even married people make too many assumptions about, what life is like for us. Like my favorite, not coping mechanism, but the dumbest thing that I've heard is, oh, you have all this time. You could, you get to do whatever you want. Yeah, I probably am just as alone as somebody who's in a marriage who feels that way. I
Right.
don't think it's not being single isn't all it's cracked up to be. I'll tell you that much. And a lot of people just assume because we have the time as a single person. No, it's about how we it's anyone, whether you're married or single, it's how you prioritize your time.
No, exactly.
So, question number one. And so the first question I would like to ask in tie with the story.
Uh-huh.
What made you decide to go into social work?
Oh man. So social work kind of chose me. I originally did not want to be a social worker. I barely knew what a social worker was. Only reason I kind of knew what I guess, the social worker was, growing up as a kid. My mom was on public assistance, and she always had to see her caseworker. So that was like my first introduction to kind of social services. Um, Literally 9/11 happens, and I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. That's why I graduated my bachelor's in communications. And then 9/11 happened, and that went through a temp agency, and they called me a couple months later after doing a test, like some ridiculous computer testing and written exam, whatever. Um, Say, we got this job for you. It ended up being a foster care agency. Um, it's like, I'll take it. And it's like, sleep on it, and we'll call you in the morning. And I mean, I did have some experience in high school working with kids, mentoring, stuff like that. But obviously, foster care is a different ballgame, something I wasn't used to or really prepared for. And stepped on it, and they called me up. I was like, I'll take the job. I was working odd jobs here and there during that time, and took the position, and did 6 months in foster care, and they made as a temp, and then they made me permanent, and then did another 2.5 years after that, and I noticed the supervisors with these funky letters after their name, MSWs, and they're getting supervisory positions. So like I kind of took that next step. Okay, if I want to make some more money or step up in my career, I guess I got to go back to school, even though I swore off going to school after I got my bachelor's. But decided to get my master's in social work.
So you what was your GPA like? Because I've researched Fordham before, and I know Fordham always had a very difficult, stringent GPA requirement. Not just even at the master's level, but at the bachelor's level.
Remember what my GPA was. I know it was like over three somehow because I kind of just was on autopilot during most of my time in grad school. Just a lot going on. I had gotten married like the year before I went into grad school, and then even during grad school, had my first child, and just trying to work full time, going to school part time, and coming home to a brand new baby. Um, it was just a lot, and part during that time, part of it was when my ex-wife addiction started was while I was still in grad school.
So how did you fall into so that's the part of the story I was trying to understand at the start. The pills and addiction, was it because of stress?
No, that's actually my. Uh, so my wife, I was obviously had my son through C-section, like an emergency C-section. So she started Tylenol 3. So this is going back 2009. So any medication I may mention may not be what the heck is that for the people who are
Funny
listening.
because I think that Tylenol 3 sort of probably sounds like a Tylenol extra strength.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. So she was taking them pretty much like candy, and then like mixing them with beer at the time. Um,
That's the part that I caught that was intriguing about it. Yeah, because you mentioned it was probably not easy to have to tell both your parents and her parents this that she had a problem, but at least you admitted in the story that she at least said, yeah, I need to get help.
yeah, that's also part of unwrapping my story with in in therapy because you know someone who has an addiction problem, admitting to it is very hard to do. And she realized she needed help, and luckily I was there. I even brought it up to one of my professors at Fordham, like, hey, I got a family member who needs help. We live in New Jersey. Anyway, can you help me? And she did a whole intake assessment. Was willing to do an intensive outpatient program, and however, we did not have the family support that we needed from her side of the family to
So her side of the family were not thrilled that she was doing this.
or just like lack of like just using an excuse that they don't have time to be home with my son, caring for him while she go to treatment.
I can see why it would be difficult for, even a set of parents in her cases to want to make the time to try to understand it. But, it's not an easy thing to see that from someone, that's for sure. And it's at least good to hear that you're going to therapy this year because listen, I've had to go to therapy throughout different times of my life. I like to say that from a young age when my parents divorced, which was also not the world's easiest because I love both of them to death, but unfortunately neither of them wants to talk to each other even at this point, and they're both 69 and 67, soon to be 68. They don't care for each other, but neither can they retire because this is the dilemma among baby boomers right now.
Right.
Not everyone in this generation is going to be able to retire or can retire, but you know That's a story for another day.
That's a
So,
whole podcast episode right there.
oh yeah. I want to eventually do a whole episode myself on. I want to eventually do a whole episode myself that's dedicated to having, like and some other, and a few other social workers to talk about the divorce topic because, divorce, you can't just bring anyone on that type of an episode because not everyone has gone through that in their life.
Right.
Like, one of my best friends, and I love him to death, who just got married last year, for the life of him, he can't understand coming from my original community was in Cross River, Katona. If you're familiar with where Danbury, Connecticut is.
I've I've heard of Danbury. I don't think I've ever been up there.
Well, anyway, original community that I came from, a lot of people came from money. So unfortunately, the idea of somebody's parents who are divorced doesn't necessarily cross their minds, but it's not easy for them to understand either in that type of more affluent high school area.
Hmm.
And we're talking about families where, before I even get into, I could point to myself and say skin color, or I could just say you're talking high 5 to 6 to 7 figure families living up, on the northern side of Westchester County. They have a completely different, view of the world versus, somebody like you who, if I caught correctly, grew up in the Bronx, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so the world I came from and the world you came from are two completely different things, but there are some, tie-ins and understandings because I like to say this. I've said this to Madeline, I've said this to Erica. You actually took me out of that community. I probably have more in common with, yourself, many of your co-authors who are social workers, many people who come from the city.
I, I can believe that.
Yeah, because if you really think about it, my father makes 6 figures. He's a business executive, but if you actually look at where my father came from in childhood, it was from Lower East Side in Paterson, New Jersey. So there's that in common, but he doesn't like to show that to my brother and sister who came from money.
Right.
Even though I went to a great school district and got a good education, we could make the argument that, like yourself, you can get as good of an education as possible, but if you have divorced parents, you're not going to be given good opportunities. And if you leave your original community, you have to start all over again. So you're not going to get good opportunities.
It depends.
Well, it depends on that old phrase which we were both consecutively taught. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Yeah, that's true.
But that's a whole another topic about position.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, not everyone has access to those type of things. So, okay, you mentioned broadcasting was what you wanted to do first, but you got placed at a social service agency. What was it about the social service agency that you liked?
Oh man. Um, I was just so focused on having a full-time job so that I can have some money in my pocket. Even though I was only making at the time 8.25 an hour. Um,
Which is supposed to be $15 an hour, $16 an hour today.
right.
But that's only in this state. The federal minimum wage has never gone up.
Yeah. So and with, it's crazy to even work at a foster care agency and making that type of money at that time, but and doing it for 6 months. But the kids, working with kids, kids were cute. Now I'm a big kid at heart. Obviously, their safety and well-being takes precedence, and just kind of learn about mental health. You learn about I was doing some like you know couples counseling a little bit, even though I wasn't really trained in it, but just kind of like the
But
basics.
you had exposure to it, and
Yeah, I had exposure to
that's
a
kind
whole
of
lot of different things.
you
And
were at least exposed to it to be able to understand it. And it's funny when you do certain types of programs. When you have exposure to something, it makes more sense versus trying to learn it in a classroom.
right. So, even like just job security, is just foster care is a very cutthroat business, and you gotta cross your T's, dot your I's at all times. And then the agency I worked for ended up being on probation from the city. So by the time that happened, I already had put in my resignation. So, but
When
just
the city, who was mayor at that point? Was that Bloomberg or was that Giuliani? Bloomberg, right?
that was 2002. That's a good question.
That was Bloomberg. That because I think Giuliani had finished the year before.
I think that was Giuliani's like very last year, because I think the election, Bloomberg won the election later on that fall when I first started, if I remember correctly.
Did Giuliani tend to punish agencies he didn't necessarily like?
Just the agency, I mean, the agency is no longer in business, so we kind of talk about this, but just the agency just
Yeah.
was doing stuff, and I would go to court and kind of do things to protect the family, or kind of do things that, and just be honest with the attorneys, like, you need to do this, because my agency is not going to do it, and it needs to be forced. You got to force my agency's hand, and like, but you asking for a court order against your own company, and like, trust me, you got to do this. And it's like,
Oh God.
so like literally asking for like court orders and short orders, for agency to do what they need to do. So um, yeah, 3 years of that was more than enough.
So what did you do after the first agency? And were you still enrolled in the MSW?
Um, so, but the next job was at the time was uh, intensive case management, a supportive case management, intensive case manager role. Now it's called health home model. Um, it was during that time when I actually went to school to go get my master's. Um, and so kind of seeing clients who were, now they call it, severely mentally ill. At the time it was called SPME. Um, so dating myself a little bit, and just seeing clients in the community. Obviously, making sure that they live in an apartment, making sure their bills are paid, their rent is paid, helping them budget. They end up in the hospital for psychiatric reasons. I would visit them in the hospital, set up doing discharging, uh, setting up case conferences, discharge planning with them. Literally count medication, making sure that medication compliant, a whole lot of different things. Wraparound funds if they need any sort of assistance. Just a variety of different things, and a lot of it happened in the community, and also doing like field trips for them. So I would like coordinate trips for clients. We would like go to, at the time was like City Shea Stadium before the Mets got a new stadium. We did
Before they got by the way, don't mind me asking, was the first agency ACQC, and is when you obviously the one you're probably speaking of, is that the Puerto Rican Family Institute? The second one?
No, the second one is also not in existence. It's called Steinway Child and Family Services.
Which one?
It's called. It used to be called Steinway Child and Family Services.
Who'd they get bought out by?
Um, I think they just went out of business. I heard some shady stuff happen with some money. I don't know. I don't want to get into all that.
Yeah, no, you don't have to.
I know.
Interesting question.
I know they messed.
Looking-
I know they messed up
looking-
my 30th birthday because we that summer leading up to my 30th birthday, I was like furloughed and have Fridays off. We're not getting paid for having the days off. So by the time I turned 30, I literally had no money to do anything.
I can only imagine, and that trying to explain certain things with wages to even one of my oldest friends, it's like I can talk about this stuff with people like you because you understand it, but he doesn't. He's always consistently had a six-figure income. But anyway,
You
I
said
I know
AC.
exactly what it's like to have, you know, to have few hours, and I was working retail at the time because supposedly for somebody on the spectrum, these are appropriate jobs, which they're not. No matter what age you are, the only time they would be appropriate is if you're receiving certain benefits from the government. If you're not receiving government benefits, then you can't really sustain a rate or raise a family or support yourself on retail level wages.
Right.
Yet we think people on the spectrum can live on this wages, and you can't. I
You
could
really
sit
can't.
here and I could sit here and bash the government, but there would be no point in that because all I have to say right now in regards to the state level government or the federal government is we still have people over 60 who are basically, saying we need to create a bunch of jobs, but you're not creating the right type of jobs,
No, that's true.
as policymakers. But that's more of a political topic, and we're unfortunately in an election year where nobody can carry these type of conversations very civil,
Exactly.
especially with who just got in a lot of trouble and banned from the state of New York. Yeah, that guy.
And he still might win.
This is only because the people who vote for him, let's be honest, are not capable of being able to hold actual conversations.
Yeah, for the most part.
But anyway, all right. Yeah. That's the one topic I'm doing my best not to touch this year because unfortunately I just got into a text argument with my friend up in Boston who's another one that has a very hard time understanding. I've said to him very nicely on topic of, some of what we're talking about in regards to your story that we need younger now to be starting to speak up for people, within consecutively your age group, my age group, and, Gen Z and Gen Alpha. We don't need somebody as old as 80 years old still making decisions policy wise for the country.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to play into the ageism, but yet I'm not thrilled with either candidate, and
I'm not trying to play into ageism either. Where I'm going
I
with
get
this
it.
comment is when we're talking about public policy, which
Yeah,
can be a very tricky topic. But today, if you want people to go into traditional occupations, you kind of need to look at what the cost of living would be today.
no, absolutely.
And you need to adjust your wages to that. This means we can no longer continue to have people who are rooted in what worked in the 20th century will not work today, especially if you're going to quadruple the cost of living, which is why I'm guessing one of the, leading into one of the questions I asked, what was the reason you moved to Delaware because of the cost of living?
That was one of many reasons why I left. um, so I met who was my wife now. Um, literally, met. Her name is Janice. So I met her literally 3 months after my ex-wife passed away.
This
Um,
was Erica, correct, in the
yes,
story?
my ex-wife Erica. Yes. So literally 3 months later, after she passed, I meet Janice at a New York City Latino professional events, Labor Day weekends, and we kind of hit it off, and and then obviously when we were like courting each other and dating, and she had plans of moving to Delaware. So I never been to the state of Delaware at that time at all. Never even thought about visiting Delaware. I just heard of Delaware, whatever. So obviously we start dating, and a year goes by, 2 years go by. So I meet like her family for the first time. Like, so all her two brothers and her parents, they live in Delaware. So when you meet the family for the first time during the holidays, that type of thing, and obviously they drive me around, and I see all this brand spanking new construction that's happening all over the place. I see middle school and high school look like mini college campuses, and just like state of the art facilities. Like, oh, looking around, like I kind of see myself living here. And
Well, I'm sure it was different. I've been through Delaware before because my father lives in Maryland. I've sort of, I think I went through one of the cities on the Greyhound at one point. It looked very interesting. I've never actually been through there, but when I go on the Amtrak, I kind of get a view of the countryside, and it does look very pretty.
yeah, so obviously, and then during around that same time frame too, I kind of like made a just to kind of feel and see where I'm at in terms of finances. So I had a acquaintance of mine host a home buyer event, and I credit her for beginning my home buying journey with her event. And I went there. I meet a realtor there who had just gotten her realtor license in Delaware. And we start talking a little bit, and I started following her on Instagram, and she posts these immaculate looking houses in different parts of Delaware. Like, oh, this is nice. And no, I keep going back and forth, during the holidays, with my girlfriend. Um, at the time, my girlfriend, and we kind of make a decision like 2019, late 20. We kind of decide, hey, let's do this move and go. And obviously, this is
So
before.
you pulled the trigger at that point, and we're just like, you know what? It might be worth it to try something else.
Yeah, and by the time I was, going into politics a little bit, I was tired of, you know, Governor Cuomo, and kind of tired of De Blasio with their nonsense. Just got tired of my surroundings and my community, seeing like the same people on the block doing the same thing at the same spot every single day, and uh, it reminded me of my best friend, who he's been my best friend since like the third grade, and he used to say, "Oh, I don't like going back home because we see the same people doing the same thing, and it's like it's whack. I don't want to. I don't want to go home." And so
Where I would be different with you in terms of you. It was funny. I love and miss my old community of Katona, but I moved down to two different parts of Westchester, and I to a degree I got to experience what you do, what you saw, and what you see in another state by just going down county. I've thought about moving out of the state, but then I realized a couple things. First, what state would I move to? Is there going to be reasonable transportation? What am I going to do for work? Even though I want to be an entrepreneur, how am I going to support myself? And if I have a need, I'm too far away from my mother and from my mother. My father My father and I butted heads for a lot of years. We get along now, even though he can be a little hard here and there. But the idea of me going down to DC, and he even offered that, last year, saying, "What if we looked at all those autistic hiring programs in DC?" I'm like, "You're going to be retiring in the next 4 to 5 years. There's no point in me moving down there if there was a job offer when you're going to be leaving, since the area is expensive enough as it is. So
Right.
what would be the point? Especially when, they say government work is stable, sure, but if you see the president changing every 4 to 8 years, it's probably not a good sign.
Yeah, especially these government shutdowns that happen.
Thank you. And that's part of and a lot of that played into why I decided to, remain up here where I am. It's not easy, it becomes harder, especially in this state. And I agree with you because honestly, I don't think Hochul's much better. Since she came from exactly the same person. I don't like
Mhm.
I don't like Cuomo myself.
Yeah, there's just uh, there's just a lot of different factors, and so by the time 2019 came, and okay, like 2020, we're gonna make a move and just go and try it out, and obviously pandemic came and that kind of derailed everything. But we thought about contemplating waiting a year, and at the time, my mom was actually was hospitalized for breaking her ankle in two places and was in a nursing home for like 7 months. And literally came home the weekend before the whole world shut down. So I was dealing with that. Um, so taking care of my mom pretty much became like my immediate priority. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure that I kept working because I had thought about taking like FMLA or something like that to take to care for her. But I made a conscious decision to keep working because I needed that W-2 income because I really was also focused back on my mind of trying to get a house. And I needed the consecutive W-2 income to show that I have income for when I did apply for a mortgage that I qualify and get a mortgage. Literally like a month later, my mom ends up in the hospital, got diagnosed with COVID, and then came back home after a week and had to call 911 back on regarding her, and went back. She went back to the hospital, got went to another nursing home, and passed away the first weekend of May of 2020.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sure that wasn't easy.
No, not at all.
How old were your parents? Are they considered boomers or older?
Yeah, I guess
When were they born?
mom was born 42. My dad, who is still alive and lives with me now here in Delaware, he's 70. Was born in 46.
So your dad was at the start of the baby boomers, and your mother would be what we call the silent generation, which was anyone born 1925 to 1945. Boomers are 46 to 64. So, yeah, that's interesting because I've seen some of these couple matches just from, the kind of work that I do, where you're looking at patient demographics. I do scheduling. So, I see everyone, when you pull them up by, phone number, you know, through different charts, because that's something we both understand.
Yeah,
No, just when you're looking at basic information. But
gotcha.
okay. Now, a great question I thought of. Okay, what did Erica Sandoval want you to convey when she approached you to do volume 2? And how did she find you?
So obviously we first connected on Instagram, started following each other, and then actually invited her to come on my social work podcast. It's called the Social Work Ranch
I want to
Podcast.
touch on your podcast as well. We'll get because that's going to be part of the entrepreneurship. But you had her come on your podcast.
Yeah, so she actually at the time she was the NASW New York chapter president, and we actually had a phone conversation. Obviously, with being the president of NASW, you gotta kind of like watch what you say and ask certain questions. And at the time, the national chapter of NASW was doing things on social media that they shouldn't have been doing. So we had a whole conversation, and then she came on the podcast. And we had like literally like an hour, 45-minute conversation to the point that I had to have, did a part one and a part two episode, and then we just connected since. And then originally I was supposed to be part of volume one, and just the timing of it didn't pan out. So then volume two appeared like, hey, like definitely let's do this. I made the time for it, um, and just going back to my chapter, asking kids for permission. I literally was like, hey, I got this idea. I've been wanting to kind of share my story for a long time. I just didn't know how the best way to go about doing it. I wasn't ready for to go to therapy yet. And kind of like ask the kids, like, hey, I want to write about our story. Obviously, not talk about the whole story. There'll be stuff that I probably never will share to the kids that happened, and just share basically because I want to protect them and kind of um,
No,
yeah,
and I
share,
understand that.
share what I wanted to share, and
I
they're like, yeah, do it.
understand that being as that's their mother.
Yeah, exactly.
You
And
don't ever want to. I'm not a parent yet. We don't know when this is going to happen, but I could tell you one thing that probably isn't going to be easy if I can ever become. I'll be able to at least understand just because of the fact that I've lived with autism most of my life, and I lived with two people who didn't have an understanding of it.
right.
Like one thing that I didn't like about the 1990s wasn't so much the clinical diagnosis part of it, but that's a different topic. That would be another podcast, topic within mental health. Why, we can discuss this openly now, but in the 1990s and the 2000s, I can remember, as I've said to a few other authors, I can remember when I was told, oh, this means you're mentally retarded. Or, the stigma of it. Let's try something else. What was the biggest standout one? That was a huge one. People actually thinking I was mentally retarded when no, I just learned differently. I carry an IEP.
Yeah.
And the ironic sad part is the IEP and having to disclose has cost me numerous interviews and opportunities within the last decade, because we don't, as a country, we have not done enough for people on the autism spectrum. I can
No,
say
I
that to
agree.
you because you'll understand that. I can say that to many social workers who will start to agree with me on that one. The tricky one is I have to frame this correctly because with DEI people, they're not always necessarily fully understanding of people on the spectrum either. And we're supposed to be a group that they should also be, fighting for as well.
Nah, I agree with that.
Besides, think about it. Someone on the autism spectrum, doesn't matter what skin color they are because they're everywhere.
Nah, absolutely.
It's not about the skin color with people on autism spectrum. It's basically we come in black, we come in white, we come in Latin, we come in Asian. It's all well represented.
Absolutely.
So interestingly enough, and I have an interesting Erica story because I had a very difficult time trying to understand her posts when I was interacting with her back, very slowly between 2020 and 2021, around that time when I was using LinkedIn, more. especially during lockdowns. But when she finally made the time to come on my show in 2022, which is what you're on, Pick Your Brain podcast. Pick Your Brain podcast is basically a combination of not just you telling your career story, but it's also me sharing personalized stories about being on the spectrum, to a varied audience of not just social workers and teachers, but parents of all ages. That's the mission of this podcast, so that, the next two generations can at least have a better understanding for their parents, especially, and grandparents. How do we support, how do we support a child on the spectrum? Well, first
Okay,
off, you don't go around labeling us. How about that?
absolutely.
Or if you want to label us, let's set aside clinical diagnosis from medical condition. They're two completely different things. Somebody who's blind and somebody who's on the autism spectrum, have two completely different sets of challenges. It's not the same.
I totally agree.
So when she finally came on my show, I was 100% appreciative of it. And we, just like what I'm talking about with you, I talked about some of this stuff with her, coming from my old neighborhood. The one that I had a little bit of trouble with is, what she labeled as white supremacy, which I wouldn't even call that white supremacy. I think I told this to her and Madeline. You're talking about outdated corporate structures that, some generations are still holding on to. There's a word I like to use for this: authoritarian. Remember how, you mentioned your mom was born in 1942. So imagine how businesses were run in the 20th century, but now you have three younger generations wanting to be more humane toward their workers today. More understanding. Like, here's a good example. If you go and ask for PTO, I don't want to have to divulge a reason why I'm taking the day off.
Right.
That shouldn't be anyone's concern why I'm taking the day off. This goes back to that old structure in the 2000s where, well, I don't have the coverage. Why do you need the day off? It's like, it's not your concern why I need the day off. If you hire correctly, you had enough staffing, it wouldn't be an issue for me wanting to have a day off.
Right.
So I came to be able to understand that, and she even respected me for saying that, because me, her, Madeline, and Madeline's boyfriend were all out last, September for my birthday, and it was a fun time. It was a fun time because we could all talk, and I wouldn't have guessed, but she even said she had severe ADHD, and three of us all agreed, honestly, just like autism, instead of considering these disabilities, we should really call them abilities or superpowers.
I like the superpower.
Because if you really think about it, if people do more of this, my best friend who's a teacher agreed on this last night. The one thing I'm sure you learned through doing your LMSW, from working, at a foster agency, is probably a lot of people don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
Would I be correct?
Yeah.
My best friend last year, not the one who I interviewed yesterday, he has a hard time doing this. It's like, the book here, even in the few stories that I've read, talks about traumas and triggers. I notice the people who go around claiming you get too triggered, they're the real ones getting triggered because they don't know how to listen. So now tell us now what your podcast is about and what the theme of your podcast is.
Oh, so yeah, it's called the Social Work Rants Podcast. Is on YouTube and all audio platforms. Originally, when I started the podcast, kind of used my broadcasting background and kind of honestly, initially, I just wanted to do the podcast that had like no real structure to it. And then obviously COVID happened and kind of all these ideas just started popping in my head. I initially wanted to give out like resources to fellow social workers who to help their clients out. And then I had this idea of just using the podcast as a networking tool to meet other social workers, just like a boots on the ground, kind of see what is happening in their community that I'm not going to hear on CNN. I'm not going to hear it on MSC or any local news. Like what is happening related to social work on the ground that affects their particular community. So literally, I've interviewed people from California, Michigan, Florida. I interviewed people in Canada. I interviewed people in Europe and Australia. Our podcast is literally heard in so far over almost 70 countries. Just been doing it the last 4 years. This done 8 seasons. I'm at episode one, almost 170 episodes in. Um, just try to be consistent with it. Releasing about to after I'm done talking to you, I'll be uploading my episode for this week. So just trying to be consistent.
That was my goal going into this year. And by the way, when I was in community college in 2004, my original major was communications, much like yourself. Unfortunately, I fell into podcasting because of COVID. This was something I had always wanted to do and was encouraged to do by my old friends. But then at the same time, it was kind of all over the place. And then when COVID hit, I finally just said, after after two bouts with COVID in 2021 and 2022, I need to do something for myself because I'm not, because of how the disability is looked at, I'm not getting the opportunities to, create the kind of life I want. I want to be able to buy a house, start a family, and I can't do that on a 9 to 5. Or I could potentially do it on a 9 to 5. But then, as I was just explaining to Madeline last week, in a very nice way, I could get a second job, but what I'm doing with you and everyone right here is the second job. I just need to figure out how the heck to monetize it.
Right.
Or not just even monetize it, get it to a point where besides income comes in, it does one of a couple things. And you just mentioned something that I also utilize the podcast for. And I've even talked about this on LinkedIn myself. I'll definitely tag you on a sort of a post like this because I did it last year. You're right. Podcasting is networking, just in a different sense.
Absolutely.
This is what you're doing. This is exactly what I'm doing as well, because I thought about it like this and I tried to explain it to the best friend who got married last year, but he will never understand it until he experiences it himself. This is basically building a community for myself with what I lacked when I left my old community. So in order to get opportunities, meeting people like yourself, marketing myself, selling myself, going out there and meeting people, this is one method of doing it because, even though he thinks everything should be face to face, can't do face to face with everything. Not in broadcasting. You know this, I know this. This has to be built online.
Right.
This has to be built online. He will never understand that, but it's broadcasting. You studied broadcasting yourself and you know.
Yeah, especially not nowadays too. Like just and especially now that AI is kind of taken over, there's so many different tools to use. So yeah.
And even Erica agreed with me because I took marketing back in the mid 2000s. And then I went into business administration and sports management because, I wanted to do something with that. The field of marketing changed in a decade since we both consecutively went to college, and even education itself. Everything went more digital.
Mm-hmm.
So that means I would have to go back and study marketing all over again. Not that it would be a bad thing, because with YouTube and Zoom, you can do more, you can do things like this more often. You can hit record, make a podcast like you're just saying, on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
Which is, one of the most important, consistent things that any of us can do. So Lastly, I just want to ask this great question. I came across a post on your LinkedIn and it was about going into like kind of a personal finance biz sort of business model. What are you
Yes.
doing with that?
So, uh, so doing market research, like the the baby Gen Xers like myself, who got kids now and either taking care of their parent, or they got somebody elderly in their family that they're taking care of, and kind of figure out, all right, obviously, social workers, we got student loans. We myself, I got a house. I'm trying to invest in the stock market. I'm trying to like pay off my mortgage and doing those type of things. I'm like already thinking about college for for my oldest and how that's gonna look like. So we in this
I'm
talk.
You would laugh at this. I want to invest in the stock market myself. I would like to get, if I monetize this, I would like to be able to invest in, commercial real estate and my own real personal real estate land as well. I'm not that much different from you, and it's funny with personal finance. I only finally started understanding it more now than when I was a kid.
And that's kind of my goal is that, yeah. So I'm 44, and a lot of the stuff that I'm learning now, obviously my parents, for a number of different reasons, didn't have that education now. So now I'm kind of, don't want to say I'm stuck, but now I got kids of my own, and I'm trying to navigate, financial struggles, and talking to other people, and kind of seeing we all in the same boat. So, okay, so how can we like help each other out, and kind of, you know navigate, our finances, and learn, and grow together, and build not only wealth for ourselves, but kind of leave a legacy uh, for our kids, and while we do like estate planning for our elders that we're taking care of. So pretty much my business, Bass Moreno Consulting, is providing financial education for Gen X, people of color in the sandwich generation, help them financial build financial stability for themselves and their families.
I'm actually going through a licensing course right now through two other social workers who I had on my show. Uh, it's a lot of concepts to understand, but it's gonna be one of several things that I'm gonna use with my show to not just promote for the autistic community, but to also kind of help them promote their platform, Revolution Finance. But I saw kind of an opportunity. Not I saw an opportunity with it, just like what you're doing with personal finance. But I think I realized something else. If I could have understood, if I had been more interested in it, I probably, or it would have been taught correctly as a kid, I probably would have had a better understanding of it in my 20s and had more money saved right now. I mean, better late than never. I have, money saved and invested through, a couple 401ks, two 401ks and a 403b, but like I said, if I had the brain and minds, the brain fortitude for it back at 21, I would have started then. That's my regret.
Get it, and for myself and my business, and not, you know and provide that, stability of like, it's okay that you have this regret, and kind of talk through that, and kind of, all right, that's in the past. What do you want to work on right now, and how can we get you there? So literally be a 4-step plan, kind of like 4 sessions, kind of go do basically like a psychosocial from like a financial standpoint. Where did you grow up? How do you, like, how did you live with your parents? Like, what did your parents do? Like, what did you see? What was your community like? Um, okay, what are you most struggling with right now, and then okay, how do you want to achieve that, and build their own. You mentioned IEP earlier. It almost like a sense be their own personal, financial, plan that they come up with on their own, something realistic, something achievable, realistic that they achieve on their own, and obviously it's up to them, the individual, to put in the work to achieve that goal. And if they have another goal, they could come back and try to achieve another goal. And
Mhm.
not something like okay, I want to spend $2 on a lottery ticket. I'm going to win the lottery, and then like I got all this money. Like no, like something actually that you can actually do
That's the middle
on your
class
own.
that's still believing that lie that one day you'll win the lottery, and then that just turns into a gambling addiction. I mean, the lottery is no different than if you're going to the casino and playing slots or something like that. It's kind of sadly the same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
we could talk about that particularly for days, but hey, listen, you came on early. It's been about an hour. We had a great conversation, and I'm glad you came on and made the time for this. I had a lot of fun tonight.
Yes, so did I. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yep, and there'll be I we my other podcast format under the Pick Your Brains umbrella or Opinionated Collective umbrella. This is basically interview style podcast. Main one is basically Opinionated Collective panel discussions. We'll debate. I'm going to be putting more panels together probably foreseeably toward the end of this year, maybe a few more next year, but I'll keep you in the loop about that. All right.
All right,
You'll
sounds
you'll
good.
definitely be invited back to the panels because another tool and reason for this podcast is to get a roster of new guests for panel discussions. A lot of different things, especially past an election year. I want to be debating different topics. So anyway, Bass, thank you for coming by. Have a good night, my friend. All right. And I'll see you guys next episode.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.